What could possibly make parents their own children's worst nightmare? What prompts the desire to hold young kids captive against their will? When knowing your neighbor seems like a concept belonging to decades past, do the chances of finding these children become slimmer still? Good evening and welcome to The Fine Print. I'm Aisha Sindhu. It's something straight out of a horror movie. Two parents were arrested in California after police found that they had kept their 13 children captive at home, some shackled to their own beds with chains and padlocks. Without access to food and water, the children were found severely malnourished. Here's a report.
From the outside, house number 160 on Muir Woods Road in Paris may look like any other home in California, but inside it were unspeakable horrors.
Crazy, you never know who your neighbors are.
This couple has left America shell-shocked. 57-year-old David Allen Turpin and 49-year-old Louise Allen Turpin are also known as the parents from hell. The Turpins were arrested on Sunday after police discovered that their 13 children had been held captive in their home. The children, who were between 2 to 29 years of age, were shackled to their beds with chains and padlocks in dark and foul-smelling surroundings. Police got wind of what was happening inside the house after one of the children, a 17-year-old girl, managed to escape and called 911 from a mobile phone she found at home. The girl claimed her 12 siblings were being held captive by their parents. Police say the 17-year-old girl looked more like she was 10. When they found the other siblings, they were even more shocked to discover that 7 of them were actually adults, aged between 18 and 29. All 13 appeared emaciated, pale and very dirty, and were rushed to local hospitals for treatment.
In the time we live in, it's unfortunate to see this. It's actually heartbreaking for the staff, and it's unbelievable what you see. We pull out all the stops, so to speak, to make sure that, again, that their privacy is dealt with, that they get the appropriate care, and that they are treated with dignity and respect at a time when they need it the most.
According to public records, the couple lived in Texas for several years before moving to California in 2010. David Turpin had been declared bankrupt twice. At the time of his second bankruptcy, he seemed to have a well-paying job as an engineer at an aeronautics company. But with so many children and his wife not working, his expenses appeared to have exceeded his income. On the California Education Department website, David Turpin is listed as the principal of a private school that operated from the house. According to the website, the status of the school is active. Neighbors say they knew a large family lived in the nondescript suburban home, but that was about the extent of their knowledge.
They didn't speak. They kept to themselves. They were, like I said, the kids were invisible. And the only time I saw the kids, besides the Christmas incident, the kids were just coming out of the car, going into the house. That was it. So it was I never saw the kids by themselves. The parents were close around. But I believe that even though I thought they were kids because they physically looked like preteens, I don't believe they were. I think these were the 20-year-olds.
Police say the parents are yet to give a logical reason as to why they had kept their children shackled. And according to eyewitnesses who saw the couple being taken away, they didn't look particularly mentally sound.
She was just like coughing, acting a little weird, and just like the police officer was talking to her, and she just kept like smirking at him and like kind of like she spit twice down the floor.
This quiet middle-class suburban neighborhood is shaken to the core, with the residents now soul-searching about whether they should have spotted that something was awry. Houses on the street are so close together that it is difficult to imagine how a family could hide such an enormous secret here. And yet, that is exactly what seems to have happened.
They were the type that you didn't really get to know anything about them. They were very to themselves, in a sense, clannish. So they only kept to themselves. And the only time you would see them, you would never see anyone visit. You would never see anyone come outside. All you would really see is that they'd go out, maybe make a grocery run, and that was about it.
The couple's Facebook page shows several photos of the whole family, apparently smiling and happy, making it even harder to come to terms with the horror that was discovered. No one seems to know how long the siblings may have been held captive. And of course, no one can answer the hardest question of all. Why? Bureau Report, WION.
Now, the Turpin family's secret has come as a shock to suburban America, but this isn't the first time that a case such as this has come to light. On May 6, 2013, 3 women were rescued from captivity in Cleveland, Ohio. They had been held for nearly a decade by Ariel Castro. Amanda Berry, Gina DeJesus and Michelle Knight were subjected to torture and sexual and psychological abuse during their captivity. Castro pleaded guilty to more than 900 charges, including rape and kidnapping. He was sentenced to more than 1,000 years in prison without the possibility of parole. He was found dead in his cell 1 month into his sentence in an apparent suicide. A few years earlier, in 2008, a 42-year-old woman named Elizabeth Fritzl brought Austria to a standstill. She told police of how her 73-year-old father had held her captive for 24 years. She was locked in a concealed corridor in the family's home cellar. Elizabeth was physically assaulted, sexually abused and raped by her father repeatedly during her imprisonment. She gave birth to 7 children, one of whom died shortly after birth. 3 of them were raised in captivity, while the other 3 were brought up by Fritzl and his wife. Fritzl was sentenced to life imprisonment on 19th of March 2009. Jaycee Dugard was 11 years old when she was kidnapped on her way home from school in 1991. She was rescued in 2009. 18 years later. Dugard was abducted by Philip and Nancy Garrido and held captive in their California home's backyard compound. During this time, Dugard gave birth to 2 daughters fathered by Garrido. He was charged with multiple counts of kidnapping and sexual assault and sentenced to 431 years in prison. All right, joining me on the broadcast right now to talk more about the development as far as the Turpin family goes is Kate Fisher, WION's correspondent, joining me live from Washington, D.C. Good evening, Kate. Thanks for joining us on the broadcast. Have the authorities learned anything more about the Turpin family and the reason for why these children were kept captive?
Well, this is the big mystery, isn't it? Nobody can understand how on earth these 13 children were kept, what we are told, inside a dark, foul-smelling room. For goodness knows, we do not know how long they were held captive in this room. We understand that several of them were found chained to their beds, and they were, the authorities say, malnourished and very dirty. They haven't given us any clue as to why this has happened yet. They are speaking to the parents to no doubt try to ascertain exactly what was going on and why it was going on. And it's not just the general public who were confused as to what was happening, but of course the neighbours, the people who lived next door to this family on what is described as a quiet suburban street, a neat road, a kind of a relatively wealthy area of California. It was a clean-looking house, certainly from the outside. It had cars on the driveway. We understand there was a Christmas decoration still hanging in one of the windows. The neighbours on this street are all asking themselves how on earth they couldn't have known that something like this was happening in the house next door to them and across the road from them. So certainly investigations are continuing, but yes, everybody is asking the big question as to why, and I guess we won't find out until those police interviews have continued.
Absolutely. Kate, also, do we know more about the husband and wife in this case? What exactly were their professions? Were they employed somewhere? And were the children homeschooled? Is that why, school authorities didn't pick up on the fact that they weren't, leaving the house?
Absolutely. We understand that the family moved to California from Texas, where they'd been living for several years. They moved in 2010, and the last records for the father's employment show that he was employed as an engineer at a defence and aeronautical technology firm called Northrop Grumman, and he had a well-paid job. He was earning around $140,000 a year. But he had to file for bankruptcy, and documents show this is because his outgoings, his expenses, his monthly expenses were over $1,000 more than his take-home pay was. And that is, I presume, because he had 13 children to look after and his wife didn't work. So that was the last time we know that this man had a job, that Mr. Turpin was working. There are then records in the California Education Department that show that he was then listed as the principal of a private school called the Sandcastle Day School, which was in his home, and there were 6 pupils listed in this, all in different years, which we assume are his own children. So yes, the children were homeschooled, and in California these private schools are outside the jurisdiction of the state's authorities, so there was no need for anyone from the state to come and inspect it, to come and talk to the teachers at this school or to check on the children. And also we understand that the law in California means that these teachers at these private schools do not need to have any professional teaching qualifications. So it would have been quite easy for these children to have been homeschooled without any interference from state authorities.
All right. So
that is the, as I say, that's the last listing on any of the state authority websites of this family, and the latest contact they had with the authorities was when these police officers discovered what was happening on Sunday.
Right. Kate Fisher, thanks very much for joining us this evening and bringing us up to speed on developments as far as that case go. I'm also joined on the broadcast right now by someone who can help us understand what sort of mind carries out crimes such as these. Anuja Kapoor, she's a noted psychologist and lawyer. Anuja, good evening. Thanks for joining us here on WION. I want to know, is there a medical term or phenomenon that sort of captures this kind of behavior or anomaly, I should say, and the reasons behind it?
To put it forward, first thing is that this is a premeditated procedure. And why did they do is they have planned it that they will be shifting to California because they don't want the children to be to survive this this whole attempt to murder. I would say in India we will put it in as attempt to murder, because they were bankrupt. They didn't had and they have 13 children, so you can just imagine the expense they were onto it. And and as very well it has been given that they were not even being asked to go to school. So you can very well imagine, because of the expense, the bankruptcy, the mother doesn't work, the father, the whole thing is being premeditated. They have, why they flew from there to California was they didn't wanted their children to survive. They have kept it bondage to the bed and all, and the children who were at the age, who were older, and they were not allowed even to go out because of the emotional trauma they must have played on them. This is a paranoid behavior. This is the paranoid personality of both the parents, which has come up forward with antisocial behavior. So they didn't wanted their children to go out and complain. And moreover, the law would be little different. The jurisdiction is different.
Right.
Can I ask you, Anuja, also put it up, because the more you come to a new place.
Right. Sorry to interrupt you there. I wanted to ask you also that, the neighbors have said that they're absolutely shocked by the fact that all this was going on, behind closed doors. But is this more and more the worry in urban scenarios that, there's no interaction between families? You may be living next door to somebody, but you have no idea what's going on in their lives. And because there's no interaction, the chances of finding out about cases like this becomes even more difficult.
Of course, why would they will have an interaction? A new person just comes to your place, to your town, to your neighborhood. Very rare is now, people are so fast and so much busy in their own lives, and you find a new family just come up, and they may not be helpful and may not be friendly with the neighborhoods. You see, a neighborhood just cannot come and just ask you how you are. For that, even you also have to come out and be pleasing and come to the neighbor and talk about it, So if they would have also not done it, so how do they expect that who has come? Because again, the modus operandi of the crime was to kill these children. This was an attempt to murder. They have wanted to do it. They have asked the children, either they would have committed suicide, it could have been abatement to suicide from an Indian law, if we look into. So why this? Because this is all premeditated. They wanted their children to be killed, or they wanted to murder them in this kind of a way, so that it will be malnutrition, it will look like it is a suicide,
right,
depending upon, and that is why they are coming from a paranoid personality and antisocial behavior, where the parents itself could have been a witness or a victim to any kind of these things in their own personal life. And somewhere also, apart from bankruptcy, it is one way of maybe disciplining also their children. But major which I look into is the bankruptcy and the money flowing which they cannot afford. There are 13 children where they can look into it and they can help them out.
Right.
So they cannot do this. They
Absolutely.
Don't want to.
So clearly there was a bigger story at hand over here.
Of remorse at all.
Right, and the bankruptcy factor is something that has to be kept in mind. We'll leave it at that. Anuja Kapoor, thanks very much for joining us and sharing your perspective with us on this horrific story coming out of California.